when Jesus was arrested in the park at 4 a.m. in the park with the boy.
We're not told what time it was.
We're not? Okay. So
No.
was it at night, or do we know if it was at night or a day? Do we know when the SWAT team came?
So it's in the evening. He's arrested in the evening. He's had his last supper. He goes out and prays. The figure of the boy in the park is in Mark 14.
Yep.
And it's only in Mark, and it's a strange passage.
Very strange.
Yeah. So it'd be nighttime.
And then the next day, about 8 hours later, roughly around 8 hours, he's crucified. He dies, and he dies early.
Well, it depends which gospel you read. In Mark, he gets crucified at 9 in the morning.
Okay.
In John, he doesn't get crucified until in the afternoon.
Right. And he's crucified. Who were the guys that were crucified on each side of him? What were their charges?
We're not told in the New Testament. There are later legends that deal with them.
Okay.
Where they're actually, yeah. But
so we have no idea what they were crucified for? Or what's the consensus, scholarly consensus?
Well, there's not. So people were crucified for a variety of reasons. And I guess I haven't really looked around to see what the consensus would be, but my suspicion is that they also were accused of some kind of insurrection things. Because normally the people who would be crucified tended to be the complete people at the very lowest level of the social scale. So slaves, if slaves did something nasty, they'd get crucified. But the Romans, the Romans are basically crucifying people that they see as a threat. And so probably Jesus is crucified for calling himself the king of the Jews. In all the Gospels. I mean, it's like the unanimous thing in the Gospels. And so the problem is that the Romans are ruling Israel. And so if he calls himself the king, he's saying that he's the ruler of Israel. And so they don't like that. They crucify people like that. Okay. So it may be that they were also, they're called, the problem is in the Gospels, they're called a word that's often translated robbers. The Greek word is leistes. A leistes, though, in Josephus, the Jewish historian Josephus, uses the term leistes to refer to guerrilla warriors, people who engage in guerrilla warfare. And so if that's what it means...
When was he?
First century.
First.
Yeah. So he talks about people... Yeah. He's our main source for information about first century Judaism. And by the way, it doesn't say much about drugs.
Didn't Julius Caesar also call the men who kidnapped him when he was a child leistes, and he crucified them as well?
I don't recall.
So if Jesus was in the park with a kid at 4 or whatever it was in the middle of the night, and the SWAT team pulls up on him and he goes, "Why are you pulling up on me like I'm some leistes?" Like, what is he probably saying here?
Yeah, well, he doesn't say that in Mark. He says that in John. And so the kid is one story. The leistes is in a different story.
So you're saying he doesn't say, "Why are you guys pulling up on me like I'm a leistes" when the kid's there? That's in two different versions.
Yeah, I think it's in two different versions. I don't think that's in Mark. Hold on, let me check.
Let's find it.
Let's find it, because I thought
it was in Mark.
Maybe it is. Maybe
Steve.
I'm just kidding.
Yep, gotcha.
I've got Mark. I've got John on my mind right now, because the leistes has a kind of a double meaning in the Gospel of John.
Okay.
And so that's why. Let me see.
Leistes. Just give me a second, and I just threw it over here.
You don't even need. I will look at it right here.
He's got it. We got two versions. We got the.
Oh yeah, it does usually say it's in Mark.
Mark 15:27.
No, it's in 14:48.
I hate this freaking.
Yeah, leistes. Yeah, you're right. It does occur there. But what's it got to do with the kid?
So what is it? So what does it occur? What does the passage say?
Mark 14:48. Jesus answered and said to him, "Have you come upon me as a leistes with swords in order to arrest me?"
Right. So like,
Swords
out of all the
and clubs to
definitions we have, obviously he's not saying, "Why are you pulling up on me like I'm a pirate?" Like, why would you be a pirate at 1 a.m.?
Yeah, or a robber. It's talking about being an insurrectionist.
An insurrectionist.
Yeah. Why else would soldiers come after him? It's not for, you don't send a band of soldiers after somebody's stolen a loaf of bread.
Right? Why are you coming up to me like I'm a leistes?
Yeah, that's it.
Like, what am I stealing here? You know, it is weird that he's with
No,
the
it's
kid,
not
though.
stealing. It's here. It's not that he's stealing something. It's that they're arresting him for being an insurrectionist.
Right.
And the way you know that is because they arrest him, they put him on trial for being an insurrectionist.
Right.
So that's why they're arresting him.
Right.
Not for being a robber and not for being a pirate. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, but I'm not sure what the kid has to do with that.
Yeah, me neither.
So the kid is only in Mark, but it's a strange story because it's this, they try and grab the guy and
They pull his towel
he's
off.
a young man. It's not, no, he's wearing a linen cloth. He's wearing like a robe or something, a linen robe. And they grab him and it says he's wearing a linen robe over his nakedness. They grab for him. They
What
only
was the
get
word
his,
for it again? Sindon.
Yeah, okay, good enough. And so they grab it, and he runs away buck naked. Mm-hmm. And that's it. It's Mark 14:62. And so the question is, what in the world is that all about?
Right.
And people have different theories.
Yeah. Ahmed has a theory.
Oh God. So does Morton. So does Morton Smith. Do you know about Morton?
No.
Oh my God. Well, so you should be interested in Morton Smith. So Morton, have you ever heard of the Secret Gospel of Mark?
The secret. I have heard of the secret gospel.
Oh my
yeah.
God, you need to do some episodes.
Oh
on
yeah,
this.
please.
Yeah,
please
Morton
enlighten
Smith, man. I'm telling you, well, he's written a whole book. Oh God, no, it would take 3 hours to describe the Secret Gospel of Mark. But what he argues in the Secret Gospel of Mark, now this guy is a serious guy. Morton Smith, he was like, oh my God, he was so much smarter than anybody else, and he knew it. And oh God, this guy was brilliant. But he had this kind of ultra theory. He taught at Columbia University.
Okay.
And wrote his first dissertation in Hebrew, modern Hebrew, and is a New Testament scholar and scholar of early Christianity, scholar of early Judaism, and he was absolutely flipping brilliant. But he claimed to discover a new gospel, a gospel that was a secret version of Mark that had been published by Mark later than the Mark that we have, that had additions to it. And he wrote 2 big books on this thing. And the reason it caused a big uproar is because he argued that this passage in Mark 14:62 about the young man running away with just a linen cloth over his nakedness is actually referred to in this secret gospel, and that it suggests that this is a young man that Jesus had baptized in the nude, because they baptized people in the nude, and then had spent the night with him, teaching him the mysteries of the kingdom of God.
Jesus.
And,
come on, Jesus. We can do better.
Oh no, he thought he was doing pretty well according to this version. But he has these 2 books. One is called The Secret Gospel of Mark, which is written for lay people, but he wrote a scholarly edition of this whole thing because he claimed to have discovered this manuscript in a monastery in Israel. And it's not clear whether it was a forgery or not. And it's not clear whether he may have forged it.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Is this it?
Gospel. Yeah, there it is. Yeah.
I love this part right here. Some scholars suggest that the letter implies that Jesus was involved in homosexual activity.
Yeah, well, Morton Smith does.
Yeah.
And some people agree with him, and some people think that he's just actually doing this to make waves and to forge something that other scholars accept as authentic.
Sure. Well, I mean, it is. I can imagine how that's frowned upon by most people.
Yeah, most people didn't like that,
especially if they're theological scholars.
But the thing is, you could accept the secret gospel and not accept his interpretation of it, because the gospel itself doesn't say that Jesus was engaged in homosexual activities.
Right. Exactly.
And so it's the interpretation that people objected to. But now there's big questions about whether it's an authentic writing or not. If it is, when it was written. And so forth.
So my introduction into this, Amens, you're probably going to laugh me out of the room after I tell you this. His theory, the drug theory of what's happening in the park is Jesus was participating in the mystery in the upper room prior to when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Mm-hmm. and he was drinking viper venom, the death inducer. So his idea of how people participated in the mystery was they would ingest the viper venom, come up to the edge of death to where they're about to die, and then they would take the antidote. And according to Galen, the way they came up with the antidotes to things like viper venoms was sort of like antibody therapy, like ancient antibody therapy. So they would take young people who had way better, more robust immune systems. They would slowly give them an introduction to viper venom with like a small cut in the skin where they'd impregnate the bandage with venom, wrap the cut in the skin. So they would do a slow introduction of the venom. So it wasn't enough to kill them, but their body would fight it off and create antibodies. So then they would use the young person's bodily fluids as an antidote for the older people who got high on the viper venom. So you get high on the venom and then you take the body fluid so you don't die, right? So it would save you. It'd be the antidote. And what Ehrman says was the Antichrist, because the drug was the Christ. The drug was the Christ. Sorry. The antidote was the Antichrist.
All right.
Okay, so the kid had the bandage on him because he was the antidote, because Jesus was tripping on viper venom in the park, right? The kid was there because Jesus needed that kid's bodily fluids so he wouldn't die from the viper venom. It was his antidote, so he would survive that psychedelic trip that he was on. The kid ran away. Jesus was crucified. When he's on the cross, he's screaming out, he's thirsty, I'm thirsty. They tried to give him the sponge. His followers tried to give him the sponge, which had the antidote on it, the antidoton for the dipsas, according to Nonus, the antidote to the horned North African viper. And Jesus said no, he refused to take it, and he died early because he refused to take the antidote. And that's the explanation to why Jesus died early and why he was screaming and why he was so thirsty on the cross, is because when he was arrested in that park, the boy was his antidote, and the boy ran away, so he didn't get his antidote. That's a fun one, isn't it?
Well, yes, I suppose it is fun. So, yeah, well, I think that, every theory needs to be considered seriously.
Yes, I guess.
And one needs to evaluate probabilities.
Sure.
And for openers, in the text, it's clearly a Passover meal. In all of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, it's the Passover meal. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't say anything about Jesus drinking venom, obviously. Mm-hmm. What he does is he takes so at the Passover meal, we know what foods were eaten at a Passover meal, included unleavened bread and several cups of wine. And he takes the bread and breaks it and says, "This is my body." And he takes the cup of wine and says, "This is the new covenant in my blood." So normally at Passover, they weren't drinking venom. We have no record of anybody drinking venom at Passover. We have many, many, many references to people drinking wine. And it's portrayed as wine. It's likened to his blood. Normally it's thought that's because it's red wine that looks like his blood. I don't think venom normally looks like blood. Right. As to the young boy, it doesn't say anything about that. And so it's just, you can make things up. And it sounds interesting, and people will say, "Oh, that sounds interesting," but what's the evidence of it?
Right.
And what's the evidence that he's drinking venom?
One of the things that you've written about a lot is the idea of the virgin birth story, the Immaculate Conception.
Mm-hmm. Those are different things. The virgin birth refers to Jesus' mother, who conceived as a virgin.
Right.
The Immaculate Conception has to do with how his mother was born. She was born, God did a miracle. Her mother was not a virgin, but the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception is that when Mary was conceived, unlike every other human being, she was conceived without a sin nature.
Oh, okay.
So her mother did not pass on the sin nature to Mary. That became a later doctrine to show why Jesus did not inherit a sin nature from his mother.
Okay.
So the Immaculate Conception isn't about the birth of Jesus. It's about the birth of his mother.
About the birth of his mother.
Yes.
Okay. And where does this idea come from? Like, where are they getting this?
Well, where does any theologian come up with their ideas? And so the earliest accounts of Jesus' mother are in a book called It's called the Proto-Gospel of James. Mm-hmm. And it is a early 2nd century book. And it actually doesn't even mention the Immaculate Conception yet. In this account, it is an account of Mary's birth. And it's a miracle because God gets her pregnant even though she can't get pregnant from her husband. But the strange thing about this story is that it's actually a virgin birth rather than a virginal conception. So a virginal conception is in the New Testament. That's when in Luke and Matthew, she conceives without having sex. But that's different from a virgin birth. A virgin birth is if she gives birth and her hymen hasn't broken in the process of giving birth. The hymen breaks because the baby comes through the birth canal.
Right.
And in the Proto-Gospel of James, a midwife gives her an internal exam. Mary, this is a legend, gives her an internal exam to see whether her hymen is broken. And it has not. And so now it's not just a virginal conception, it's a virginal birth. And as theologians started thinking more about it, they realized she must not have only conceived as a virgin and given birth as a virgin, she must have been a perpetual virgin. And so then you later get the idea of the perpetual virginity, or she never had sex.
Right.
And then after that, you come up with the idea she never even had a sin nature. And so the idea of the Immaculate Conception becomes a doctrine in the 4th and 5th centuries.
That's so bizarre. I didn't know that. Why? So they're saying that how was he born if he didn't come through the birth canal?
It's a miracle.
It's a miracle.
How did he get born?
Was it a
How did he get born
C-section?
from a virgin?
Did they do C-sections back then?
Well, they're called C-sections because they're Caesarean sections. They're
Right.
Caesareans,
Yeah.
named after Julius Caesar.
Oh.
Because his mother was having trouble giving birth, and so they took him out of her womb.
Did she survive?
I don't think so. They usually didn't. In the ancient world, they usually would take the baby instead of the mother.
Oh, wow. I had no idea. It's named after Julius Caesar.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. See? That's why I'm here.
Yes, that is why you're here. Wow. That's fascinating. That is fascinating.
Right. But you were going to ask me about the virgin birth.
Yes. Yeah. I was originally asking you about the virgin birth. So that didn't borrow from any other ideas or any other myths?
I just did a class on this yesterday at Chapel Hill.
Mm-hmm.
I had my students read a bunch of Greek and Roman myths about people being miraculously born, because there are a lot. We have them. We have accounts of a god getting a woman pregnant throughout Greek and Roman mythology. In every case, though, the woman is not actually a virgin in the Greek and Roman versions. Most of the time, she's just a woman who's had sex a lot, never had kids, or God gets her pregnant, but a god gets her pregnant. But the god always has sex with her. And so there are these fantastic stories. My students thought this was really bizarre, because you have these stories about how Alexander the Great was born. And it turns out that Alexander the Great was born, that he was the son of Zeus. And Zeus came down in the form of a snake and lay with his mother. And his father, Philip, Alexander's father, Philip, was watching through the door and seeing this snake cohabiting with his wife. And then she got pregnant by the snake, who was Zeus, and Alexander the Great was the son of Zeus, because the snake got her pregnant.
Oh my God.
With the snake. Yeah, it's very
incestual
and Freudian to boot. And so the snake figure. So
Freudian, yeah.
Yeah. So, but in any event, so you have these stories of gods getting women pregnant.
Right.
What doesn't happen is gods get that she remains a virgin. So that's different in. They're all different. Like, all the stories are different from each other, right? Mm-hmm. Getting pregnant from a snake is different being pregnant by a swan, or something.
Right.
But so there are accounts of divine men. They're almost always men, with only one or two exceptions, whose father is a god. But the difference is, in the New Testament, the father who's a god, the woman is still a virgin.
Okay. Interesting.
In other words, there's been no penetration, whereas
Right.
in the Greek and Roman myths, there's penetration.
Yeah, it seems like the Greeks and these ancient cultures were obsessed with this stuff. They were just obsessed with this, like,
With
nasty.
what, sex?
Yeah, they were obsessed.
Unlike the
with
American culture?
Yeah, yeah,
Come on.
yeah.
Every culture is obsessed with sex.
No, I mean, it seemed way more than us. I mean, it seemed way. It didn't seem like. Let me put it this way.
They're nowhere near as obsessed.
Maybe not more obsessed, but it didn't seem like there was the cultural sanctions around this kind of stuff that there is now.
It depends where you lived.
Oh, okay.
Well, I mean, today, if you sleep with somebody else's spouse, your spouse might leave you.
Mm-hmm.
In Israel, if you slept with if the woman slept with her neighbor's husband, they'd kill her. So, which takes it more seriously.
Right.
But in those cultures, a lot of the time, the sanctions for inappropriate sex were connected with property rights, and so already in the Old Testament, the problem with a woman committing adultery is that. So a married woman has sex with another man. The problem is this other man has taken the husband's property rights.
Oh, okay. I see.
And so that's why in the Ten Commandments it says you shall not covet your neighbor's house, his wife, his donkey, his axe, his ox. So the wife is right up there with the donkey as one of the guy's properties. And so it's a property issue, but it still takes it far more seriously than we do.
You think that Jesus was a real historical person, right?
Yes.
And there are people you've debated that think that he's not.
Yes.
What is the argument to him not being a real historical figure?
Good question. What, good argument?
Yeah, what's the best argument you've heard?
Well, if I were arguing that case, I would say, I guess, you're saying it's the best argument is kind of like it's a very low bar.
Right.
It's best.
Understood.
Yeah. Okay. What's my best round of golf? I mean, it's like, well, okay. It's like, I think what gives some people pause, not so much. Yeah. Okay. What would give people pause is that we don't have any eyewitness accounts of Jesus. Mm-hmm. We have records that are from probably 40 to 60 years later. Our first author who mentions Jesus is the Apostle Paul, and he's writing in the 50s. Jesus died around the year 30. So the first time we have Jesus mentioned in any source is about 20 years after his death.
Do we know when that drawing was done with the donkey head on the cross, the guy with the head of an ass on the cross?
Yeah, that's later. That's in the second or third century.
It's later.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And it's a much debated thing. People say they know what it is, but in fact, it's debated among experts what it actually represents. It's clearly Jesus on the cross with a donkey's head.
Yeah.
And a graffiti next to it. But no, it's much later. So the first reference to Jesus at all our first Christian writing is the book of 1 Thessalonians. Mm-hmm. And it's usually dated to the year 49 or 50. Mm-hmm. Jesus died around the year 30. So it's about 20 years later. So the argument would be that we don't have any eyewitness reports, or we don't have any, things that are really close to the Gospels. The first Gospel is written around the year 70. So that's 40 years later. Mm-hmm. So, so why should we think he really lived? That's kind of the argument. Mm-hmm. It's not a good argument, but it's an argument.
Right. And it is crazy too. I mean, that goes with a lot of historical figures. Like I think Moses is one. Moses wasn't written about until, 1,000 years after he supposedly died?
Yeah, well, 30 years is very different from 1,000 years.
Yes, very different.
So when Paul's writing, there were people alive who knew Jesus.
Right.
And Paul knows some of them.
So it's a much better case for Jesus than Moses.
I mean, Paul knows his brother. Paul personally knew Jesus' brother. So, I mean, if Jesus didn't exist, you'd think his brother would know it. Mm-hmm. That's a joke. Moses is a whole different thing. I mean, so if Moses lived, Moses would have probably lived in the 13th century BCE. Mm-hmm. And it's not clear if we have any sources that mention him for centuries.
Right.
So, that's a different thing from somebody talking about him who knows his brother. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, then the claims when it gets into him being divine and
Well, that's a
doing
different story.
doing all these things and being able to, that's the whole thing. Which I read recently, this fascinating book that really gave me a really good understanding of everything, which was Thomas Paine. I forget the name of his. I think it was The Age of Reason by Thomas Paine.
Yeah, no, it's a classic.
Oh my God, it was such a good book.
Yeah. No, these English deists were really something. They knew a lot, but they didn't know what scholars know today about things like the Bible.
Yeah, and he explains how like the first Christian preachers, how they were, selling Christianity, and then there was the second generation of Christian preachers, then the third generation of Christian preachers, and how the ideas and the motivations and everything gets lost in each generation, and then eventually down the road, it's kind of like the starting point. We don't even remember where this started, but we do know that the preachers are making a living off of this stuff, right? So the idea of Christianity is just like this game of telephone throughout history, especially when you have these people making a living off of it.
So, someone like Thomas Paine is a very important figure for like the history of biblical scholarship. He wasn't a biblical scholar himself.
Right.
But these 18th century English deists mainly led to the development of biblical scholarship and the scholarship in early Christianity, especially in Germany, as it turns out, but then also in England and France and eventually in America. If you want to know what was really going on in Christianity, you don't want to rely on what they have to say because they're at the very beginning. It'd be like, if you're going to be studying what evolutionary biologists think today, you definitely have to start with Darwin. But you can't base your views of evolutionary biology on Darwin. You've got to see what we've found since then, because even though Darwin was a genius, there are other geniuses who are standing on his shoulders. Mm-hmm. And so he opened the way for people to learn more and more and more. But it'd be silly to assume that like everybody now agrees with what he was saying then, because they don't. And it's the same with any field. If you look at the giants because they're just absolutely amazing and they make these breakthroughs. But if you want to see what we know now, both on the basis of new discoveries and new ways of analysis and deeper analysis by experts, then you have to go to the modern experts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think one of the most profound things that I took away from that book was that it is the gift of reason that gives man the ability to discover God in the first place, because it's impossible. Like, we didn't come from nothing, right? We go backwards in time. Like, I came from my parents came from their parents. Like, things don't just appear out of thin air. So it is just by us being as intelligent as we are, we have to understand that we can't appear out of thin air. There has to be some sort of higher power, right? Without that gift of reason, we don't have that.
Well, that's what these.
So it's like the human brain. There's something ancient in the human brain through evolution or whatever it is that makes it wired to be dependent on believing in a higher power.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's much debated about why people believe in higher power, and there are a lot going on. But the whole project that the people of the Enlightenment were doing, that Paine and the other people of the Enlightenment were doing, whether historians or philosophers or theologians or biblical scholars, whatever, what they were doing is they're trying to break with the tradition of the church that had been established for hundreds and hundreds of years, where your knowledge came from revelation from God. That's how you know things, because God reveals it to you. And the people of the Enlightenment realize, well, actually, we can figure things out ourselves. And that's when the sciences develop. And it's it's only when someone like Isaac Newton comes along and realizes, even though he's a devout Christian, he says, you can't trust revelation for anything. You've got to do the experiment. And if the experiment comes out to be differently from what you expect it to be because of your beliefs, so much the worse for your beliefs. Once you say that, you start science, and it changes everything. But Paine is all part of that, even though he's not a scientist.
Right, right. And a lot of those guys around Paine, like the founding fathers, they were Masons, right?
I suppose so. I'm not sure how that affected their, yeah.
Freemasonry was a big thing with the founding fathers.
Yeah. Well, okay.
Yeah, no, it's just interesting. You know, it's just that's an interesting thing.
But the thing about all of these, Paine or anyone else, whatever their other associations, whatever their other religious commitments or non-commitments, whatever their philosophical stance, when they say something, it needs to be evaluated. Yeah. And that's true of everything. Mm-hmm. You know, for me, I mean, I'm basically a historian. Mm-hmm. And so when I want to know whether somebody said is true or not, I have to do the analysis. So if he's a Mason, you know, if he's whatever. I mean, today, if somebody is whatever, I mean, is a Satan worshiper, is a Mormon, is a Roman Catholic priest, whatever it is, if she or he says something, I look at it and evaluate it. Mm. It's not based on what they happen to be.
One of the folks I had on here recently believes that the Septuagint, it was originally written in Greek and that it was translated into Hebrew. And the reason he said that is because, and I'll try to elucidate this argument the best I possibly can, and you can basically deconstruct it and give me what you think, is that Ancient Greek is a language that had over 1 million unique words. Ancient Hebrew is a language that had maybe 7,000 at best unique words. And he made the argument that you cannot translate from something less technical, Hebrew, to something way more technical, Ancient Greek. He says you translate down, you don't translate up, right? So you don't like, if I was to, the analogy I think of that I try to explain when I talk about this is like, you find a flying saucer in the desert and you want to like reverse engineer it and make your own flying saucer. When you try to reverse engineer that flying saucer, you're not going to make something better than that flying saucer. It's going to be something not as good, right? So that was his main argument with the translation of the Septuagint, meaning like that's why he thought it was an original Greek, and then it was translated into Hebrew after. But the argument of this is that the Greek that we read in the New Testament or the Old Testament is like Koine Greek. It's like a very unsophisticated Greek compared to like Homer and some of the ancient stuff.
Yeah, well, it's not a very good argument. I don't know who this is, but I mean, it's a very bad argument. You frequently have translations go both ways, translated up, translated down. It's just an empirical fact. English is a much more complicated language than many works that are translated into English, and the Bible gets translated into many languages that are much more simple than Greek. So it goes both ways, and it always goes both ways. Moreover, how does he know there are 7,000 unique words in Hebrew? He's basing that on the fact that we've got these texts that have 7,000 unique words. Okay, these are the only texts we have. People spoke Hebrew. We have no idea what their vocabulary was. For him to say that it had to be only these 7,000 words is a little bit crazy. That's like saying if you get a copy of Time magazine or something, or it's not even printed anymore, but you get Time magazine and you say, this is the extent of the English vocabulary. Mm-hmm. Like in 3,000 years, somebody finds a Time magazine and they categorize all the words, say, okay, those are the only words in English. And so it could not have been translated into a language that has more words because it doesn't work that way. How do you know how many words?
Sure, but just going off evidence, right? We have evidence.
What's his evidence?
Sorry?
What's his evidence?
I'm saying just going off evidence of word counts, unique word counts for those languages today. We only have 7,000 unique words for ancient Greek. We have over 1 million. We only have 7,000 for ancient Hebrew, and we have 1 million for ancient Greek.
That's right. That's what we have today.
Those are estimates, right? Those are samples, maybe.
No, they're not estimates. He's basing this on account of what the Hebrew words we have. But when people translated the Hebrew into the Greek, they didn't have just those 7,000 words. This is 2,000 years ago.
Okay, but do you think that do you think the scale was similar though? Do you think so? Right now,
it doesn't matter how similar it is because it's not always that you take something more complicated and make it more simple, or that you take something more simple and make it more complicated. Okay. You can absolutely just show time after time after time where that is and how it happens. There are also very good reasons for thinking it did not go from Greek to Hebrew.
Okay, what would be a good example of something that went from of a translation that went from a language that was less complicated to something far more complex?
That went from something less complicated to more complex.
For example, Hebrew to Greek.
Coptic is a very simple language in many ways. You have Coptic, we have ancient Coptic texts. The grammar isn't as difficult. It gets translated into English all the time. English is a far more complicated language.
Okay. Interesting. So, and then my understanding of the Septuagint is, and correct me if I'm wrong, the Septuagint was allegedly written around between 300 and 400 BC?
No.
No. Okay, when was it?
We don't know. For one thing, it's not that early. But what we do know is that there wasn't a Septuagint. So when people talk about the Septuagint, they're using, when scholars say the Septuagint, they're using a shorthand. There were numerous translations of the Hebrew Bible into Greek that were floating around. And it'd be kind of like today if you go to some developing country and you have missionaries there who are trying to put parts of the New Testament into that language, okay? So like you have these translators, these conservative missionaries who try, Wycliffe translators, they'll take the Bible and they put it into some language in Africa that hasn't ever been put into English before. Mm-hmm. So you do that so that the people in that language can read it.
Okay.
In the ancient world, after Alexander the Great, so after the 4th century, Jews are spread throughout what was then, at one point was kind of a Greek empire, but then became the empires around the Mediterranean. The educated people read Greek. They didn't read Hebrew.
Right.
They would read Hebrew in Israel, but not in other places. So in different places, the Bible is being translated into Greek. Mm-hmm. Eventually, there was one form of that Greek that came together, and that is what they're calling the Septuagint. But it's a mistake to think it was a one-time event.
Oh, interesting.
And it's people say that because there's a letter called the Letter of Aristeas, which is a Jewish writing that's trying to explain how it happened. And the way it explains it can't possibly be right. I mean, it describes it to this miracle. It says you had these 70 Jewish scholars who were brought together. They were all put in separate rooms. They were all given the assignment to translate it. They all translated it literally word for word the same.
Right.
Which is like, of course, that's crazy. But it does show that they were aware of the fact that it came out of the Hebrew into the Greek. And there, again, this is not, I know you don't like people saying there's not a disputed topic, but there's a reason this is not a disputed topic. Mm. I mean, because for one thing, I'll give you one piece of evidence. But I mean, a linguist would just tear that apart, that whole idea apart. One reason it would be torn up, I mean, like a serious linguist who knows both the Semitic languages and the Indo-European languages would tear it apart. Okay. And one of the reasons is because there are many instances where the Greek embodies what are called Semiticisms. The Greek of the Septuagint,
right,
and the Greek of the New Testament.
Okay.
A Semiticism is when you're taking a grammatical construction that doesn't work in the language that you're translating it into, or is not normally used in the language you're translating it into, but you keep the grammatical construction of the original language for the sake of authenticity or because you don't know quite how to. And so just as an example, if in Hebrew, if you want to say the Holy Spirit,
okay, there's
no way to say Holy Spirit in Hebrew. The phrase in Hebrew is the Spirit of holiness. The way you make an adjectival attribution in Hebrew is not by using an adjective, but by putting together two nouns and saying of. So the Spirit of holiness means the Holy Spirit, or the way of righteousness means the right way. Okay? So Greek speakers don't do that. They use adjectives. But when you get in biblical Greek, Septuagint and the New Testament, you have these Semiticisms. That shows these are not original Greek compositions.
Okay.
They're being translated from Hebrew with using Semitic forms.
Okay, interesting. But so the original Hebrew we don't have other than the Dead Sea Scrolls. Is that correct?
Well, I don't know what you mean by the original.
Like the original Hebrew. So it was translated into Greek from Hebrew, but that original Hebrew.
We have Hebrew manuscripts, yes.
We had the manuscripts. Okay.
But we don't have the original manuscripts.
We don't have the originals, but they're basically what I'm trying to say is like scholarship tries to date them to a certain spot, but we don't know actually when they are because we don't have them.
I'm not sure what the them is that you're referring to.
The manuscripts.
We don't have we don't have original manuscripts for any writing from the ancient world.
We don't have right. Okay, I see what you're saying.
We don't have the original writings for Euripides, or for Plato, or for Cicero, or for Seneca, or for the book of Isaiah, or for the Gospel of Matthew. We don't have the originals for any of those. The original manuscript. If you mean by that the author sits down and he writes.
Yes.
So I'm Mark and I'm writing my thing, and I write my thing. Mark. We don't have that thing he wrote.
Everything that we have is a copy or a rewriting.
Unless it's a personal letter, a correspondence. But in terms of literary texts, they're copies.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's a big problem. For the Bible
no, I
and
can
for everything
imagine.
else. It's a huge problem.
Yeah.
That was what my PhD was, because the reason I was interested in analyzing Greek manuscripts is because with the New Testament, we have thousands of Greek manuscripts, but they all disagree with each other because they're all copies, and the scribes made mistakes.
Right.
Or they changed things on purpose. Right. So you got to figure out, well, what did the author say then? If you've suppose you've got 10 copies of Plato's Republic or something.
Okay.
And the 10 have they word certain lines differently. Certain sentences are worded differently among these 10 manuscripts. Well, okay, so you got that, but you want to figure out, well, what did Plato write? You got to figure it out. And there's a whole science to doing that.
Oh, wow, that's so interesting.